to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Our friend Sam Page can't join us today, but he'll be back next week. He's actually pet sitting today, which shows just what kind of a heart he has, as we all know. But I'm kind of hoping one of these visits we're going to get another piece out of his album that he's put together. Karen, he's a pianist.
Oh, okay.
He just recently recorded an album in the studio where he literally recorded every song just ad lib, whatever came out. That's the kind of guy he is. He's
phenomenal.
able to just improvise and have and it's beautiful stuff. It's all very beautiful. It's lyrical. It's really wild what he's able to do. So, but we aren't going to have him this week, but we'll get him for next week for sure.
Okay.
But I do have Karen Hale joining me today from newclevelandradio.net.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how we connected through Podbatch. I don't remember what the sequence was there, but I know that when I saw your profile, Karen, I was interested that you give a lot of attention to life for people after 60, 65, something like that, which I think is great. I love that. I mean, so many people think about senior years as, oh well, you take it slow, life is slowing down, everything's falling apart and so forth. But no, not these days. Actually, we're now in a stage, I think, where more and more people are living longer and living healthier. So those old rules kind of go out the door, don't they?
They certainly do. I mean, as I tell people, there once was a time I thought I'm not old enough to do something. And then when I thought I was old enough to do it, I was told I was too old.
You're too old. Oh, dear.
And, that's just how our society looks at things. And I refuse to be pigeonholed and told that I can't do something because of my gender, because of my age. I can do things today that 20, 30, even 40 years ago, I never would have thought to do. So, life is a lot different than when my grandmother was in her 60s and 70s. In fact, when she came over from Europe, she looked like she was 60 or 70 when she was in her 20s.
Yeah, sure.
And that's the difference. And hey, let's live our best life. That's all we can do.
I agree. In fact, I was thinking back to when I was a kid and how the people who were in my circle, grandparents mainly, who were in that age group, how they behaved, how they thought, and so forth. It's entirely different.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's like wildly different. It's hard. It's almost hard to explain to the current generations how different it was. If you didn't go through that, how do you explain that? I don't know how to do that.
It is quite difficult. I mean, today I was looking through some pictures I wanted to post on Facebook, and I had a picture of my mother's mother with my two older brothers when they were. One was an infant and one was about 4 years old. And my grandmother at that point looked the same to me as she did almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
And same type of clothing and, carried her body in the same way. And I remember my mother, when my mother was about 60 years old, my mother lost a lot of weight. She was wearing blue jeans and T-shirts.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, hey, if she can do it at 60, when I get to be 60, I'm going to do the same thing.
Sure.
So,
Why not?
yeah,
Absolutely. That's cool. So how did New Cleveland Radio get started? Tell me about that.
Well, interestingly enough, my son, it was a business major in college, and he really wanted to work in the sports industry, but the small college he was going to didn't have any leads for him. And so for his internship, they put him at an internet radio station.
Oh.
And I realized he was doing what I had dreamt about doing.
Really?
When I was his age.
No kidding.
Yeah. I wanted to go into broadcasting. My parents said, no woman will ever make it.
Oh, well.
And that was in the late 60s. And in the late 60s, they were sort of right.
That was pretty much true. Yeah. Women's roles, so to speak, were pretty limited at that point.
So when he was graduating, I decided to go back to get my master's. And once I got my master's, I was very unhappy in corporate America, and
Mm.
I said, "I'm gonna leave corporate America, and I'm gonna do what I think is important." And, I started blogging, I started creating websites and podcasting, and I
Mm.
had no idea what podcasting was back in 2010 other than, you use a computer and you need an internet, and you're hoping that people will listen to you.
Absolutely. I started in 2012, and so you started roughly in the same era I did, and you were on your own. You
Yep,
didn't have Zoom, we didn't have StreamYard, we didn't have Podmatch, we didn't have all these resources. We had to kind of
exactly,
figure the whole thing out ourselves.
exactly.
Yeah. So
And
that was the
and I did
challenge.
and I did it because, well, number 1, because I saw my son doing it and doing well at it and
Mhm.
thinking, "Boy, that's what I've always wanted to do."
Mm.
But more so the fact that I wanted to help people get out of a rut.
Mm.
And I saw so many of my friends and neighbors, not happy in what they were doing. Um, and I thought, you know what? There's got to be a way to express, your unhappiness without being doom and gloom. And so
Mhm.
that's what I did.
Mhm.
I talked about the fact that, yes, I left corporate America. At first, it was depressing. But then, I wanted to tell people why I left and
Mm.
what I thought I could do to be happy. And I realized I've been happier doing this than any other job in my life. And I'm not making a fraction of what I was back in corporate America.
I totally get it. I totally agree. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've mentioned it actually many times here on the program. I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know what your answer is going to be to this next question. My
Okay.
listeners know what the answer is because I say it all the time. But I'm curious to know what your answer is going to be. What's the biggest, most wonderful thing that you find by doing your podcast? What's the thing that you appreciate the most?
I'm learning more about myself
Hmm.
and how to take care of myself,
Oh, okay.
which I never did in the past.
Hmm.
I was brought up, make somebody happy, and then you're gonna be happy. And
Hmm.
so I was making mom and dad happy, my older brothers, grandparents, uh, friends, neighbors, but I never felt totally satisfied.
Right, because you're a people pleaser at that point, and that's not pleasing to you.
Right. Well, I was pleasing all of them,
They
but
were
I was
pleasing. Yeah,
but I
they
was
were they loved it.
yeah, exactly. Um, and I suffered in when I was told I was doing it wrong,
Hmm.
when I would say, "Well, how do you do it right?" Nobody knew.
Hmm.
Nobody knew what to tell me. Um, and so when I went back to school, I realized I was doing that for me. I had to prove to myself that I could do it. Um, and then once I realized I could do it and I could be in the honors class, which I didn't understand how that was happening. I was working full time, had a family, and going to school and getting honors. Um, that's when I realized that we have to give ourselves more credit.
No kidding.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, one of the it's a characteristic I think of a people pleaser. This again, another topic we have talked about a lot,
Yeah.
which is people pleasers, you're right, they don't really feel good about themselves. What's ironic though is how a people pleaser very rarely is able to receive. You know what I mean?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Like, you go out to lunch with somebody and, they offer to pick up the check. You say, "Oh, no, no, I got the check," because you can't receive the gift of the check.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
And
like
I
it's a perfect
and I have
example
to
of how it works.
and I have to tell you that my husband, he's my second and final husband. Uh, we've been together 38 years, and
Wow.
it took me almost 38 years to accept a compliment from him, and he's
Wow.
constantly complimenting me. And I would look at him and go, "No, my hair doesn't look that good. No, this really doesn't look so good on me. Oh,
Mm,
no, I didn't do that so well." And then I finally realized that I was I was taking his happiness away. And when I
sure.
realized it, it was like, "Oh my god, why am I doing that?" If he tells me that I look beautiful, thank you. I
Mm,
appreciate that.
yeah,
If you tell me that this is the best dinner I've ever made you, wow, thank you. Um, and so it's only within the last couple of years that I'm now learning how to take a compliment, and
that's
especially
great.
from him, and that's important.
It is, and maybe you weren't really taking his happiness away, but you were demonstrating, in a sense, a lack of appreciation for what he was giving. That
Right.
might be a better way to say it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, that's great. And your answer was an excellent answer. It's actually different from my answer about what it is I appreciate most about my podcast, our podcast, because I have so many good co-hosts here. But it's a great answer. I love the answer. My answer is I love the perspectives because I love talking with all kinds of people and getting all kinds of perspectives. But it dovetails with your answer. I mean, your answer was about how you learned about yourself, and I did too. That was one of my main motivators in starting the podcast in the first place. But what it evolved to for me is I also learned so much from somebody else, from many somebody
Absolutely.
else's, and I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I think the different perspectives that I encounter here on the show and off the show are the best things that happen in my life.
Well, and I find I'm less judgmental than I've ever been in my life. And
Right.
I didn't realize I was judgmental until I just took this um, seminar course
Mm,
about identifying our strengths and weaknesses.
mhm,
And one of my weaknesses was being judgmental.
mm.
And it really upset me when I got it back. It was like, "No, no, no." But then I thought about it, and it's like, that's the culture I grew up in,
Mhm,
and even though I kept saying that I wasn't, um, I had to start looking at things differently, and, especially with my 2 sons,
mm.
they'll come and say something to me, and my first reaction is to tell them what I think. And I'm realizing I don't have to tell them what I think.
Nope.
I can just listen. And what a difference that makes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. The piece that I also attach to that is the appreciation piece, in that when someone shares something with me, I don't always pull it off. So I can't say I always remember to do this, but on many occasions I learn to do this. Especially I'm learning more and more to do it because of the podcast, because you kind of learn to do it when you're with a guest or a co-host. But I try to make it a point to find what can I appreciate about what they just said? What is it that I can appreciate about their viewpoint on this? Because what I've learned over time is that the more that I can appreciate, no matter, even if it's something I don't like, by the way, they could be saying something that just really turns me off. But if I can find something to appreciate about it, something to say, well, yeah, I don't necessarily like that, but I appreciate this about it. Boy, do I! That's where I do my learning. That's where I pick up the most information. That's where I learn most. Talked about learning about yourself. That's where I learn most about myself, by picking up what they're saying from their perspective and saying, wow, I never would have thought about it that way. And then suddenly it starts filling in pieces for me.
Well, and last night here in Cleveland, they had the Republican and the Democrat gentlemen who are going for the Senate seat in
Mhm.
Ohio.
A debate.
And as I was watching it, Um, usually, I just take a side. I say to myself, I'm Democrat, I'm Republican, I'm independent, whatever. And
Right.
that's all I really want to listen
Yeah.
to.
Which most people.
But
Yeah.
last night, I actually, and my husband too, we actually listened to both sides.
Mm,
And afterwards, I could say to him, you know, gentleman A said these things, and I really believe in that. And
mm,
gentleman B said these things that I like.
yeah.
And now I'm looking at them and it's like, I'm not looking at them by party. I'm looking at them as individuals
Yeah.
and, what they believe in and how that resonates with me. And it's not always easy to do that. But
No, it's a challenge.
yeah, but I think we have to do more of that because we are all intermingled. It's not like, when my parents were growing up and, you know, every denomination lived in a certain part of the city and you
Hmm.
sort of brush sides as you went into the supermarket.
Right.
But,
Right.
um, my parents used to always tell me, yes, the Italian families lived on those 4 blocks and the Polish families lived on those 4 blocks. And and I would look at them and go, "Really?" Yeah, that they came over, from Europe, and that's how they
Yeah,
settled.
oh, sure, yeah.
But today, we're all intermingled, and that I think is a great thing.
I think so too, yeah. And the thing that I find to be most enjoyable about what we're talking about here is that early in my life, people were mainly, how can I describe it? They were mainly ciphers, I guess you could say, in my calculation. Like, oh, this is how people behave, generalizing and all that kind of
Right,
stuff. They weren't individuals. And to the degree that they were individuals in my mind, many of them I didn't want to know anyway. So I was just kind of turned off to even considering them as
right.
individuals. What has transpired over time, particularly through doing the podcast, but even before, is as I've learned how to appreciate perspectives more, I see them as individuals more, and I appreciate them as individuals more, and I find in many cases they're pretty cool as individuals, and that was the surprise.
Yeah.
People who previously I would have thought was, ugh, I'm thinking, that's pretty cool. I doesn't necessarily mean I want to hang out with that person all the time, but I like that about them.
Well, I interviewed somebody this morning for my show, and when she first came on, she was um, a little stiff.
Mhm,
Um, she sort of told me how she wanted the podcast to go, which was
mhm.
fine.
Sure.
But the way she first told me, it was like, okay, should we switch seats or something? Um, but it was funny because once we got going, I felt like she was my best friend.
Oh, cool.
I understood everything, where she was going, and we were laughing, um, we were agreeing a couple areas we disagreed in, but we disagreed in a very friendly way.
Mhm.
And when I got off, I thought, "That was interesting," because if I would have kept that first image in my head, that podcast would have been really pretty bad.
Yeah, sure.
But I let it go. My thought was, if she takes over, that's okay, because
Mhm.
I'm here to talk to her about what she does and how she got through the maze of life, and that would be fine. But it was interesting, the 2 of us were interviewing each other, and I
Yeah,
loved it. It was
that's
really
great.
nice.
I like that. I find that, kind of piggybacking on what you were just saying there, I find that the skill that you kind of learn when you're a podcast host is how to see past the preconceptions, which is what you just did when you described that you saw
Right.
past the preconceptions, which, by the way, is not what most of us do in society. Most of us get stuck on the preconceptions. You know, this is what I assume about this person from the bits that I know, so therefore it must be true. But
Yep.
it turns out that's actually a very shallow view of people.
Yes.
Now, the person who has that viewpoint doesn't think they're being shallow, right?
Right.
They think they probably think they're actually looking with great depth. But how interesting that until you're willing to look past that, you find out there's more depth.
Well, do you think it's because, we communicate with each other, but we're not listening? But
Oh,
when
yeah.
we do get that little bit of listening in the beginning, and we think that person is, um, angry or defensive,
Mhm.
that can sort of change the way we go about having the conversation.
Yeah.
But what I've realized, and especially through my training, is that I have to be careful about my tone and my body language,
Mhm.
because so many people from my past have said I was very, very rigid.
Really? Okay.
I never thought I was,
Hmm.
okay? And so once I started podcasting, even when I was doing audio podcasting, I would have the camera going, at least for myself.
Oh, no kidding.
I
Okay.
Because if I looked angry at myself, I
Uh,
would think, "I wonder how it's really sounding."
great point. Yeah.
And, you know, most of us don't wanna look in the mirror. Come on. I mean, let's be honest. We wanna look in the mirror for 5 minutes to say our hair is right, you know, our shirt is buttoned properly, and then we wanna walk away from the mirror, because almost everybody I know sees their flaws when they look in the mirror.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
they don't wanna be staring at them when they're doing a podcast. but that's what I started doing.
That takes
And
guts.
it it helped so much because,
Mhm.
um, every once in a while, I would start to hear the tone in my headset,
Mhm.
and I'd look at myself and go, "Uh-oh,
There it is again.
you better change it up right now."
Yeah, I hear you on that. Very, very true. I love that. You're reminding me actually about the first time I tried to do mirror exercises. I don't know if you've ever done mirror work, where you basically talk to yourself in the mirror and love
Right.
yourself and all that kind of thing. And I've told this before and other guests laugh at it, so I'll tell you this to get a little chuckle out of you. But my first session doing mirror work went something like this. I love you. Oh, I can't do this. That was the first session.
I can relate, yes. But see, I grew up with a father who every morning would go into the bathroom, and he'd look in the mirror, and he'd bellow throughout the whole house, "Good morning, handsome."
I love it.
And the rest of us were like, "Oh, we wanna sleep a few more minutes." Um, but he did set the tone. He set the tone so perfectly because he knew that we were all asleep. We weren't gonna tell him he was handsome or good looking,
Mhm.
and he needed to get his day started.
It was great.
And
That he did that every day probably served him well.
oh, it certainly did. Um,
Yeah.
and my father was, a people pleaser,
I see.
but
Mhm.
he chose how to please people,
What do you
which
mean?
I didn't. Meaning, um, if he really knew that, it would be helpful to you today on your podcast, um, for him to come to the studio and make sure everything was running right.
Mhm.
If he knew that was important to you, but if he also knew that he would feel good doing that for you, he
Ah,
then would come do it.
okay.
But if he knew that, "Hey, I'm too tired. I don't wanna do it. I know this would make Walt happy, but you know what? I'm gonna find something else at a different time, and I'll make him happy." And I didn't understand that until, much, much later in life.
Yeah.
He was gone by then,
Hmm.
um, but I look up in the heavens and I thank him for, that bit of information that I didn't really use until now. But, um, you know, my youngest son moved back in the house with us for a couple of months, and, I was, very clear on, "You take care of your stuff, I'm not gonna do your laundry, you do all that."
Mhm.
But the other day, he was having a really rough day,
Mhm.
and, um, I felt that it was something I wanted to do. I saw his laundry was overflowing, and it was just something that I knew he would appreciate,
Mhm.
and I could do it for him.
Mhm.
And my husband saw me doing it, and he said, "Why are you doing it?" And I said, "Because he needs a little TLC. This will help, but I know he's gonna thank me this time." Because in the past, when he lived here, it just became routine. Mom didn't like the laundry all over the floor, so she picked it up and washed it.
Mhm.
But I was so right. He came to me afterwards and he said, "Thank you." He said,
Mm.
"I'm just in a down mood, but yeah, I need clean clothes to work tomorrow."
Mm.
And so I'm now learning that you can't please everybody 24/7. But when you do, make sure it's something that you want to do.
I agree with that. Yeah. And I don't even think about it in terms of pleasing people anymore. I like to help people, but I don't think about it in terms of pleasing them. I think about it in terms of pleasing myself that I'm helping them.
Okay.
That's the way I
That's a
like to
better
do it.
way. Yeah.
Because if it doesn't please me, I don't really wanna do it. But if it does please me, I enjoy it. I like helping somebody. Assuming now I should put a caveat in. The caveat in is I have to know that they actually want the help. If I
That's
don't know
true.
that they want the help, I actually don't want to get involved in even helping them on something because that can usually backfire. But as long as I have some reason to know, ideally they asked for help. But even if they didn't ask for help, if I asked them, would you like me to help you with this? Yes, then I love doing it.
Right. Well, that's a good people pleaser, and
A
that
good
you don't
people
get
pleaser.
well, you don't get burned out, okay?
True.
And for most of my life, I was getting burned out,
Mhm.
uh, I'd go visit my mother up in Michigan, and my mother would say to me, um, "I think you should call your aunt." "Okay. Any special reason why I should call her?" "Well, you're in town."
Oh.
"Okay. Am I gonna see her?" "Oh, no, no. We're too busy. You're not gonna see her." "Then why am I calling her?" But I was pleasing my mother and
Mhm.
pleasing my aunt, and I wasn't getting any pleasure out of it. I didn't even
Mhm.
know what to say to my aunt,
Mhm.
sometimes. And so I I I remember telling my mother one day, "You know, I can call anybody from my home, and it's not long distance.
Mhm.
So from now on, please don't ask me to call anybody in particular. If it's somebody that I wanna call, I will." And I
Good for
found
you.
myself calling my aunt more regularly
Mm.
because I called her when I wanted to.
Yeah.
And when I heard how happy she was to hear my voice, it encouraged me, "Hey,
Mhm.
do it again."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. And I think what's important about it is that we humans tend to learn from a relatively early age we're calling it people pleasing, but I think it's a little bit of a restricted title or topic name. I think of it more like do things that are expected of us because they're expected of us, rather than do things that we enjoy because they feel good.
Right.
And so the things that are expected of us become chores.
Exactly.
They can actually become dead weights. And
Yep.
now all of a sudden, because we're doing what's expected of us, we find ourselves in a place where we don't feel good about helping others. Isn't that interesting how that
Yep.
works?
Well, and that happened to me in corporate America.
Oh, really?
I I loved I loved the essence of my job.
Mhm.
Um, I was, um I was a recruiter at a private college,
Mhm.
and I loved helping the students who came in identify what it was that they wanted to do,
Hmm.
what course of study, why did they want to do it. And most of them would come in and say to me, "I want to be a nurse because I love helping people."
Mhm.
And I could turn that around in 30 seconds and say, "Well, I love helping people too, but I would be a terrible nurse. So let's talk about how else you can help people,
Mhm.
because maybe nursing is not the career you want." And I would get them to talk to me about certain things like they don't like the sight of blood.
Mm.
They don't like touching other people. It's like,
Mhm.
well, then you're not going to be a very good nurse. Okay.
You're not gonna
But there,
enjoy it.
that's right. You're not going to enjoy it.
Mm.
Um, you're probably not going to get through school because of some of the things you're going to have to do.
Right?
But let's talk about other ways of helping. But I loved what I was doing, but the culture in that college was horrible.
Mm.
Um, and they have made a lot of changes in the last 10 years.
Good
But
for them.
back then, it was like, as soon as a student would walk out of my office, my director would come in and say, "So, are they signed up?
Oh,
Did they
jeez.
sign up for the class? Did they go through financial aid?" And it'd be
Ugh.
like, "Oh, just give me a break. I'm trying to help them."
Mm.
Um, and after 10 years, I finally said, "I just can't do this
Yeah.
anymore."
I don't blame you.
And when I walked away, I cannot tell you how many of my students stayed in touch with me, and even to this
Wow.
day.
Nice.
Um, and that's what I knew, that I was doing something good for them.
Mhm.
I felt good about it. But when I realized that it wasn't a good fit for me anymore, I knew that I had to leave
Yeah.
because, um, I'm not gonna I don't wanna push somebody to spend $100,000 on a degree that they're never gonna use,
Mm.
or they're never gonna finish because of what the caseload is. So, um, you know, I think my transition from helping students to, developing the podcast where we talk about what it is that makes us happy.
Mhm.
What can we do? That I I'm not gonna be sent out to, um, the farm and sit on a rocking chair because of a certain age, you know?
Sure.
I I can find a new career. I may not be employable by some companies, but I can employ myself.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I'm thinking also, you talked about your career working with the students. I'm thinking about modern day students that I either have interacted with or know. And what I've learned in minimal contact with them about what they're experiencing, what they're dealing with, the one theme comes through really loud and clear to me anyway. And I'm curious to know what your take is on this. But the theme I keep hearing over and over again is they're going to college so they can get a job that makes them a lot of money. It's all about the money. And to give you an example of just how strong that programming seems to be for the current generation entering college, uh, I was at actually my wife and I were in a resort town on the coast, the East Coast in Massachusetts, a couple of years ago, and the young lady behind the counter at this particular shop that we'd stopped in, we were doing a little window shopping. My wife loves to do that. My wife was picking something out to buy, and I got chatting with the girl behind the counter, and so you're doing this as a summer job, that kind of thing. She says, "Oh yeah." I said, "What are you doing? Are you going to school?" She says, "Well, yeah, I start at Fairfield University, which is actually fairly near where my wife and I live." Um, I said, "Oh, that's great. What are you going to study?" She says, "I don't know. I haven't figured it out." I said, "Well, that's fairly common, but what would you like to do?" She says, "Well, something that makes me a lot of money." And I said, "Okay, well, I understand that, but can I make a suggestion?" She says, "Sure." I said, "Look first for something that you would love to do." And she had this shocked look on her face, and the words that came out of her mouth were, "I've never heard anyone say that before."
You know, it is it's sad because I grew up in a family that my father didn't make a lot of money, but he made enough that, we could live comfortably. Um, and he encouraged all of us kids to go to college and get a degree.
Mhm,
But they never talked about, you know, getting that job that was gonna make us rich. It was
mhm,
getting the job that you are going to enjoy,
mm.
because my father believed that, you'd get a job at the age of 25 and you'd have it for 50 years.
Which was the way it was done.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, and both my brothers and I, we got our degrees, we've done decently, but it never was about money for me.
Mm.
I wanted to be comfortable, I wanted to make sure I could pay my bills,
Sure.
but it wasn't that I had to have the big fancy house and the big fancy car
Mhm.
and all the vacations.
Yeah.
Um, and yet many of my friends were like that.
Mhm.
But now I'm seeing that I have 2 sons. One is 45, one is 32, and they're almost in different generations. Um, the oldest one, was determined that he was gonna go to college, he was gonna get his degree, he was gonna make good money, and he really doesn't like what he does anymore,
Mm.
but he works 24/7. He's
Wow.
an attorney,
Mhm.
um, and he basically doesn't have any life.
Yeah.
Now there's my younger son who sports is his love,
Okay.
and as long as he is working in sports, he is happy.
Mm.
Doesn't make any difference if all he can eat is peanut butter and jelly tonight. He's working in a field that he loves,
Yeah.
and that's the difference. And I coach kids on the weekend, at a big box store,
Mhm.
and I tell them, "Don't look at this as your lifelong career unless this is what you really like to do."
Right.
Do you get excited when you walk in the door here? And most of them will say no, but they're making decent money for their
Mm.
age.
Sure.
That's fine. But if you're gonna go to work like this every single day of your life, find something else you can do on the off hours that
Mm.
is going to provide you that excitement and happiness. Because
Right.
without it, you're just walking through life. You're not
Well,
living it.
you're setting yourself up for burnout. That's what
Right.
burnout is.
Yeah. Exactly.
Burnout is when you're working for the wrong reasons, and you just can only. I love the way, I can't remember who the author was. One of the more famous authors out there in self-help world mentioned that you can't give something to somebody until you have it to give. And what happens is, if you're doing a job that you really don't love, after a while you run out of something to give, and
You're
that's where the
absolutely
burnout
correct.
happens.
Right. Well, and I learned that this past year. So last year I was recording anywhere from 4 to 8 shows a day.
Woo!
Yeah.
Wow! Oh my goodness!
And that included some of my, you know, client podcasters who podcast through me,
Okay.
but I didn't have any time to breathe.
Yeah, it's busy.
And I
It's a
was
lot of work.
enjoying it until right around the first of the year.
Mhm.
And there were a number of things I wanted to do. And I looked at my schedule and it was like, I can't fit it in. I had a dentist appointment, which I put off because, hey, I'm busy.
Mm.
And then I sat myself down in front of my calendar one day and I went through it and I started rescheduling everybody. And I said, I don't want to burn out.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy myself. And so what I'm doing is I've decided how many I'm willing to do each day per week, and that's what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
And there have been other weeks that I'll look at that schedule and say, next week is too full. I'm going to contact the people who I have scheduled and I'm going to rearrange the schedule because I want to give everybody my all. And if I can't, then I'm not going to do it. And so, I learned the hard way. Yes. Did I enjoy it in the beginning? Absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean,
Sure.
I was patting myself on the back that I was meeting this person and learning this and learning that. But then all of a sudden it was like, I don't have the energy
Mm.
and I want to do other things. And that's what I put into my calendar.
So, to ask the obvious question, which probably has the obvious answer, where does the energy come from?
Um, the energy comes from the things I love to do.
Mm.
You know, having this conversation with you today. I've had 2 other conversations today, and each one has gone in a slightly different direction,
Sure.
and it gives me time to sit back and think about, you know, am I being true to myself?
Mhm.
Um, and I found that out in one of my podcasts the other day that, um, I said something that I won't say it was a lie, but it wasn't really a full truth. And I called up the person that was my guest and I apologized to them. I
Really?
said, I don't know why I said that. I said, but if you go back and listen, I said, I don't know where that voice came from, but it came out. And I said, probably because I was tired and I wasn't giving you my all.
Hmm.
And they hadn't noticed it, but you know what? Um, if I feel I haven't given you my all, I'm going to apologize. And, when I realized that today was the day that you and I were going to be doing this podcast, I rearranged my earlier schedule because I didn't want to be burned out
Oh,
when we got together at 4 o'clock.
well, thank you for that. Both my audience and I thank you for that. That's very considerate. I appreciate that. Oh, that's important. I like that. As you're describing that, I'm thinking to myself that, well, I'm also feeling to myself that when you're on the topic, and this is obviously the topic that's behind all the topics. I'm sure you address a lot of topics, particularly related to senior living and so forth.
Sure.
But the topic behind the topic is this joy, doing what you love, finding what you love, and getting the energy out of that. Because when we're giving that kind of energy and getting that kind of energy, what we're really doing is being a conductor of energy in a sense. We're like that metal bar that the electricity flows through, or the
Yep.
wire or whatever. And when we behave like that, what I mean, I don't know what your spiritual beliefs are. I tend to believe in what they call source energy and all that kind of thing. And I see myself as being part of source energy. So I see that as me being in flow with the rest of source. And everybody else is part of that flow too. And the more that you let that flow go, the better life gets. You don't even have to work at it. It just kind of flows. It's all
Right.
the flow is there. Oh, the energy is there. Hey, everybody feeding time. Let's go.
Well, it's I shared this story this morning. When I first met my husband, he was in the photo industry.
Mhm.
And we met at a friend's wedding. We really hit it off. He called me a couple times during the week, and then he said to me, next weekend I'm going to be in Pittsburgh doing a photo show.
Mm.
Show, um, if you'd like to come out, I would love to have you there, and you could maybe help me. What
Mhm.
do you know about photography? And I said, well, my father gave me this old camera. I know there's film in it. It has a bunch of settings. I have no idea how to use them. And he said, oh, so you don't take many pictures. And this was back in the early 80s. And I
Mhm.
said, no.
Mhm.
He said, well, bring it along with you. Maybe, I can help you know how to use it. I said,
Sure.
okay, fine. So I get there, and he was in darkroom sales at the time.
Okay.
And he said, you can help me with this one thing. And he showed me this 4x6 lucite little thing that had all these different colors in it. And he said, this is for the dark room when you want to get the colors right. And I
Hmm.
said, okay. And he showed me how you use it. And so I picked up on that. And everybody who came to the booth, I talked to them about this 4x6 lucite thing, and it didn't cost a lot of money, and you can get the true colors. He said he typically sold maybe a half a dozen a month.
I can hardly wait. How many did he sell?
1,000. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, he says, "The company is gonna, like, wonder what's going on." And I said, "Well, this is what I've been doing. Haven't you watched?" And I showed him, and he goes, "Oh my god." He said, "You probably sold this to people who don't even have a darkroom." I said, "Possibly. I don't know." But that's when I realized the ability I had in learning, because prior to that, it always felt like a struggle.
Mm.
And so I took it from there that I can do just about anything I want to do. Um, and about 6 years later, my husband left the photo industry, and he was working for a very small company at the time called Microsoft,
Ah,
in their early days.
their infancy.
And they were looking for beta testers
Oh,
and
okay.
alpha testers.
Yeah.
And my husband volunteered me.
Volunteered you?
Yes. And I
Oh, wait, wait,
said,
wait. No, hold on here. Wait, where does he get off volunteering you? I'm curious about that.
well, he knew what I had done in the photo industry. So he figured if I did this, I could become a whiz.
Well, you
And he
probably
thought,
could, but did you want to?
well, I didn't understand it in the beginning, but
Oh,
I'm
okay.
glad he did it
All right.
because we ended up getting a Mac and a PC at the time, which were nothing like Macs or PCs today.
Right, right.
Um, but I found that I could do something that I wouldn't have normally done. And I love the fact that I can, even to this day, if somebody says, do you know how to do something? I'll be honest. No, I don't know how to do it, but let me look at it. And if I'm interested, I'm going to figure it out.
Mhm.
If I'm not interested, you're going to know in the first 5 minutes, and I'm just going to say, no good.
Mhm.
Um, and so I became an alpha and beta tester for Microsoft and
Mm.
loved it for years. Um, and I encourage people, don't wait until you think it's the right time, because if you wait, it's never going to be the right time. And, um, I was 40 years old when I was working for Microsoft as a tester. That was my first experience really with computers, you
Mm.
know. Um, and today I now do training on the weekend in a big box store.
Oh.
Uh, I train the customers, I train the staff, and it's like falling off a log for me. And I will have people who will walk in and say, "You're a trainer, you know all this?" "You use these things?" And it's like, "Yeah, I do." And it's amazing because, um, I'm evolving with the times, and I
Mhm.
love it, and I think we all should be able to do that.
I'm guessing also that you love doing that training in the big box store.
I do, although I will say the big box stores are not as much fun as they once were, but
Okay.
yes.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair
yeah,
enough. That's
yep,
okay. Hey, the main thing is that you're enjoying what you're doing. Because that's the
absolutely,
theme we've been following here, right? You have to enjoy what you're doing.
yeah. I mean, when I walk out of there and I'm only in there for, like, 4 hours at a time. When I walk out after 4 hours, I'm exhausted, but
Mhm.
I put all my energy into it.
Yeah.
Now my husband does the same thing, but he's low energy.
Mhm.
You know, he's there, he does his job, he likes doing it. But I'm like the Energizer bunny. I walk in and I don't stop until the 4 hours is over.
Mhm. Mhm. No, that's cool though.
Yeah,
That's great because you know yourself on top of everything else.
yeah.
Which, by the way, is kind of where I want to go with the next thing here, because I want to get back to New Cleveland Radio. You talked a little bit about what it's about, and you talked a little bit about how you got it started. But where are you going with it?
So when we started it, I started it with my son, who is my sports and history guy. And he was doing all the sport podcasting. And we figured to if we were really gonna grow it, we had to have something other than just sports.
Hmm.
So he said, "Okay, you bring your talents over, you develop your shows, and we'll intermingle them." And we did that for about 6, 7 months,
Hmm.
and then he went to work for a, Major League Baseball club in Cleveland, who at that time were called the Cleveland Indians.
Now the Guardians.
They
Yeah.
are now the Guardians, and
Yeah.
they are in the playoffs.
They are.
Yeah, I just had to get that out there. Um, but when he had to move away from the radio station, um, I just took it and I sort of like turned it around. I got rid of some of the shows we were doing because they just they were too local. They
Hmm.
weren't. There was no energy behind them.
Hmm.
Um, and so I started working with a group of people up in upstate New York at in Saratoga Springs,
Oh my.
uh, Cafe Lena. I don't know if you
Oh,
know.
I grew up in Schenectady, New York. I've been to
Oh,
Cafe Lena. Oh yeah,
yeah.
I know it
So
real well.
for the first 3 years, I started interviewing all of their guests, all their musicians, um, and then that sort of developed in avoid the maze because I was
Hmm.
talking to people who some of them who didn't become true musicians until they were 40, 50 years old,
Yeah.
and others who started out in their teens and were in their 80s and still performing. And I
Hmm.
just got so excited that there is all this talent in the world,
Oh yeah.
and some of us miss out on it because we don't know what local talent really is.
Mm.
And so I started, working with them. I worked with another musical PR group. And then I started working with coaches
Mhm.
because I found that so many of us want to find answers. And
Absolutely.
the best way to find an answer is to ask questions.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. By the way, for people who are curious, Cafe Lena is a very, very unusual. You won't find this kind of establishment almost anywhere. There are very few establishments like Cafe Lena, but it's an old-fashioned coffee house
Yep.
that brings in all kinds of usually folk musicians, although there could be a wide variety of musical styles. Some of the more famous people who have played there, Bob Dylan, Don McLean. There have been a
Yep.
number of very famous acts that have gone through there, but it's usually either local or regional acts that are very talented and come in and they get the gig there, and it's in very high demand among the musicians. To
Absolutely.
be a musician and get a gig at Cafe Lena is a big, big deal. And the reason it's such a big deal is that they have a great following of regular listeners who come in to hear all the different concerts that go on there. So it's like its own community, its own culture. And I
It
wanted to let people
is.
know about that because it's so different from anything else out
Well,
there.
in they have renovated the place in the last couple of years.
Have they? Oh, okay. I
So
haven't been
now
there in decades.
there's finally an elevator so people can really
Oh,
get
there
up
is?
the stairs. Yes.
Good for
Um,
them. I'm glad they put that in.
but they also, stream their shows,
Oh, they do? Oh, okay.
and y when you watch it from home on your computer, on your TV, you feel like you're there
Mm,
because where the camera is, it's like in the first row. So you feel
okay.
like you're sitting at the table at the
Yeah.
first row. Um, and it's we go up there at least once a year to visit family and friends. And, I'll spend every evening that Cafe Lena is open
Mhm.
in Cafe Lena. So, yeah,
Mm. Is
great
Lena I
place.
don't I haven't been aware of it in a long time. Is Lena even still involved? I don't even know.
Oh, Lena's been gone for a while.
She
Yeah.
has, okay. I
Yeah.
kind of thought so, but I
Yeah.
wasn't really sure. Yeah.
But it's 60 years old.
Wow.
And it's still going strong. They just keep growing. And I'm sort of proud of it because my uh, musician, producer brother does the live streams for them. So,
Oh, no kidding. Oh,
yeah.
cool. That's
So I have a
fun.
little connection there as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Lena's is a cool place. It
Yes.
really, really is. I'm glad that they continued it after she passed on
Yes.
because it is so novel. Novel's the best word I can think of to
Yep.
describe it. I've
Yep.
never seen anything like have you ever seen anything like it anywhere?
We have something that's fairly close here in Cleveland.
Mhm.
Um, and but it still doesn't have that same camaraderie. I mean,
There's something about that energy
yep,
there. Yeah.
and there's always somebody who, at least at this point, who still knows Lena or knew
Wow.
Lena. Um, I know eventually that's gonna fade away, but when you hear the stories, of people who actually worked with her,
Mhm.
um, and they say that, oh, his name just escaped me, Bob Dylan. They say that Bob Dylan became the person he is because of Lena.
Yeah,
Lena
that's true. Yeah,
Lena pushed him,
she did.
and when you hear that, you think if anybody does wants to look at the history of it, Lena was this big, heavy set woman, okay,
Mhm.
and she just knew what she wanted to do, but she would tell musicians, "You're good. No, you're not good."
Mhm.
And Dylan, she really wanted him to make it, and
Yeah.
he did. So yeah,
I
kudos
I
to her.
I'm curious to know if you know the answer to this. I don't know the answer to this. I've heard this is true, but I don't know if it's true. And again, we're talking about musicians from our generation,
Right.
so
Yep.
the youngers may not know what we're talking about. But Arlo Guthrie, who wrote Alice's Restaurant,
Yes.
I am told that part of the inspiration for Alice's Restaurant was Cafe Lena. Do you know if that's true?
I I think it was not well, it was Cafe Lena, but downstairs from Cafe Lena is I can't think of the name of the restaurant now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, but Lena's husband was involved in the restaurant downstairs.
Okay.
And if I can think of it, all I know is chicken and waffles is the main dish of that restaurant. And I know that
I'm pretty
because
sure I don't think the whole story came out of that, but I think it was an inspiration in the
yep.
way he put that story together.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
That's pretty wild.
everybody check out Cafe Lena, it's a great place to go, and the music never dies.
Yeah, really. Well, everybody should check out, New Cleveland Radio too.
Well,
I
we
mean,
have
12 years you've been doing it. That's I mean, I've done it 10. I know what's involved in doing it for 10, so I add on a couple years, and that's impressive. That's really
well,
impressive.
you know, again, it's something that I always wanted to do, and I'll never forget when Jane Pauley was on the Today Show.
Mm,
I would sit and watch her in the morning, and I would just, like, want to be her
mm.
so much, and I can't tell you how many times I would say something to my parents, "If you only would have believed in me, that would
No.
be me," and my
She
parents
she was quite
knew.
a role model, by the way. I
Oh, yeah,
mean, she
and
was a
she's
fabulous
still
role model.
and she's still on TV. She's
Yeah,
now on
yeah,
CBS,
yeah.
um, but I think my parents knew me well enough back in the day that, yes, it was something I wanted to do, but I probably didn't have, you know, the energy that I have today to
Mhm,
wanna do it because I still wanted to play. I still wanted to go out. I still wanted to fall in love, and
mhm.
truthfully, if I wasn't in such a secure relationship all these years, I'm not sure I could be doing what I'm doing today because
Mhm.
there are days that it takes away from family and friends.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, well, we have to make choices in our lives. We have
Right.
to decide what's important, and it's an
Exactly.
ongoing process. It's not I think that's one thing that a lot of people get tripped up on. They assume they have to make one big choice, and then, they're kind of restricted by that for life.
Right.
Whereas the truth is we're encountering choices on a daily basis, and it's really up to us to decide, do I want to continue this path I've been on? Do I want to change the path? What which is the direction that seems best to me? And then this is a topic, a subtopic we really haven't gone into here, but it's kind of like it's sort of like an assumed subtopic, I think, from my perspective. What do we feel deep down? What's going on inside of us? Because that deep down inside of us, that inner being, as it's often called, the higher power, I don't care what you call it, that connection that we have, when we can learn to get guidance through that, when we can learn to get signals through that, and to utilize those signals to recognize, wow, this really is what I like. This really is where my passion is. And then to do that on a regular basis, that's pretty much what you're doing.
Well,
That's
it,
what you turned your life into.
and I realized for me I had to
Hmm.
because I was always comparing myself to other people
Hmm.
and I wasn't getting to what I thought was the right level. And
Hmm.
when I realized it's not so much that I want to be like other people, okay? I want to be me, but there's certain things I want to do maybe like other people,
Okay.
but I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
Um, and one example that look back on, when I first started college, um, my brother and sister-in-law lost their first child to sudden infant death. And I felt so connected to the child that I decided to start a support group on campus
Hmm.
for people to understand what SIDS was.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know myself. I had to
Hmm.
gather the information, but I knew that I had to heal
Okay.
because I was there to support my brother and sister-in-law, but they weren't supporting my healing. My parents weren't supporting my healing. Everybody had their own grief. And I realized I had to do something. Otherwise, I wasn't I would never resolve what I was feeling. And so I started this group and I had people say to me, "Well, what do you really know about it?" And my answer was, "I don't, but we're going to learn together and we're
Mhm.
going to learn how to get through this together." And that's basically what I did when I said to my son, "Okay, we're going to podcast together. We're going to put this together and you do the sports and I'll do what I'm going to do."
Mhm.
Um, but also realizing that it had to feel good. It had to be
Yes.
right.
And that's a terrific thing that you continue to do to this day, and I'm sure you'll keep doing.
I
One thing I want to tell you that I usually tell guests, and I think it's really appropriate in your case. One of the things that happens when we do what we do, and or when you're a blogger or you're putting out a product and you have a website and all that kind of stuff. Very often, people are putting out all kinds of content that is being consumed by people they've never met and that they'll never see, and so on. And we don't really realize how important that is. So what I like to say is, on their behalf, thank you for all of the content you've been putting out and that you
Thank you.
continue to put out. It's important. So even though you've never heard from them, you'll never see them. I know they appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't know them by name, as you say,
Right.
but I do every once in a while hear through the grapevine,
Yeah, it's fun.
my cousin was listening, my mother was listening, and wow, you said some of the things they've been thinking about for a long time. And it's like,
That's
well,
great.
you know what? Let's keep sharing. And this was wonderful, Walt. I am so glad that we got together today. I'm
It was
sorry
fun.
your partner wasn't here.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'll have to, listen to his music here in the near future. I
Yeah,
would love to hear his music and maybe even have him on my show and talk
sure.
about his music.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good idea. And thank you for sharing about newclevelandradio.net. Good luck with your continuing podcasting career. And boy, I think it's going to be great. Just go
I
with it.
appreciate it. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.